The sun had barely risen over the dusty plains when the small Apache village began to stir. Birds chirped in the distance, and a soft breeze carried the earthy scent of the land. Life in the village was simple, but not always easy. Every person had a role, and every day brought its own challenges. Among the villagers, whispers often traveled faster than the wind, and today, those whispers carried a story that would change the lives of two people in ways no one could have imagined. Deep within the village, a young Apache woman named Nayeli lived with a strong spirit and a proud heart. She was skilled in many things. She could track animals through the forest with unmatched precision, weave the finest baskets, and know which plants could heal wounds. Everyone admired her talents, but what set her apart most was her independence. Nayeli had always done things her way, speaking her mind and walking proudly. Even when others tried to control her, her family loved her dearly, but some of the elders in the village worried that her free spirit could lead her into trouble. And indeed, trouble had come, though not in the way Nayeli expected. One of the elders had made a decision, harsh, sudden, and final. Nayeli had accidentally crossed a rule of the tribe, something minor, yet against tradition. While she had not meant harm, the elders had decided to punish her. But their punishment was unusual. Instead of confinement or scolding, they chose to give her away to another person entirely. This person was a poor farmer who lived alone on the outskirts of the village. Nayeli's heart sank when she heard the news. She felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and fear. How could they think sending her away to a stranger would teach her a lesson? The farmer, whose name was Tomas, lived a life of quiet labor. His small house, made of sun-baked clay and wood, sat on a patch of land far from the center of the village. He worked tirelessly to grow enough food to survive. He had neither wealth nor status, and his neighbors often overlooked him. Life was hard, and he had learned to face it with patience and humility. Yet, on that morning when a messenger from the village arrived, he was caught entirely off guard. The elders had decided that Nayeli would live with him, and there was no room for discussion. Tomas did not know what to think. A strong, proud woman suddenly appearing at his home would be a challenge he had never imagined. How would they coexist? Would she accept him? Would she resent him for the circumstances that had brought them together? And yet, despite his worry, Tomas felt a small spark of curiosity. Perhaps, he thought, there was an opportunity here to learn from one another. Meanwhile, Nayeli prepared herself to leave the only home she had ever known. She walked through the familiar paths of the village, her eyes lingering on each corner, each tree, each face she might not see again. The elders watched silently, certain that she would learn humility through this act. But Nayeli's mind raced with questions. How could being sent away to a stranger teach her anything? She had always believed in fairness, in working hard for what she deserved. Now, all that was being taken from her, her choice, her freedom, her comfort. The journey to Tomas's home was not long, but for Nayeli, it felt endless. Each step was heavy with doubt and uncertainty. Tomas met her at the edge of his small farm, unsure how to greet her. He offered a polite nod, his hands rough and calloused from years of working the soil. Nayeli looked at him carefully, her pride flaring as she measured him with her eyes. He was ordinary, nothing like the skilled hunters or respected elders of her village. Yet, there was something honest in his gaze, a quiet strength that made her pause, though she would not admit it. At first, their days together were awkward. Nayeli refused to help with the chores, preferring to sit by herself, observing the fields and the small animals around the farm. Tomas, on the other hand, tried to be courteous, offering her meals and showing her the small comforts of his home. He did not demand anything, though he could have. He understood that she was angry, frightened, and uncertain. Slowly, he hoped that trust might grow between them. The villagers watched with curiosity and skepticism. She will never adapt, some whispered. He cannot handle her pride, said others. Both Tomas and Nayeli felt the weight of these expectations. Nayeli's spirit rebelled against the idea that she must obey anyone, yet a part of her could not deny the warmth of having shelter and food. Tomas, meanwhile, realized that patience would be his greatest tool. He had no wealth to offer, no status, only kindness and steady work. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the first cracks in Nayeli's stubbornness appeared. She noticed how Tomas worked tirelessly to prepare his land for planting, how he cared for the small animals he owned, and how he treated every living thing with respect. She saw the honesty in his actions, a simple integrity that contrasted sharply with the politics and whispers of her own village. Something inside her began to soften, though she did not yet understand why. Tomas, too, learned from Nayeli. He watched her patience when she tracked wild animals, or her careful hands when weaving baskets. He began to appreciate her strength, not just in skill, but in character. He admired how she held her head high, how she did not complain about her new circumstances, even when they were difficult. Though they were strangers at first, a quiet bond began to form, built on observation, respect, and the small acts of kindness they offered each other. Evenings were the hardest. The quiet of the farm, which Tomas had once found peaceful, sometimes made Nayeli restless. She missed the chatter of her village, the voices of friends and family. Yet, sitting by the fire, watching Tomas repair tools or prepare for the next day, she began to see a new kind of life. One without constant judgment, where work and honesty mattered more than status or tradition. She did not yet call it home, but for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that life beyond her village might not be entirely unwelcome. The first part of their story ends not with resolution but with the first glimmer of possibility. Nayeli and Tomas, two people brought together by circumstance, began to understand that life could offer unexpected lessons. For Nayeli, the lesson was not punishment, but patience and observation. For Tomas, it was not just about survival, but about the quiet strength found in connection with another human being. Neither could predict what lay ahead, but both felt, deep down, that their meeting would change them forever. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Nayeli sat on the wooden porch of Tomas's small house, watching the shadows stretch across the land. For the first time in weeks, she felt neither anger nor fear, only curiosity. What would tomorrow bring? Could a life forced upon her become a life she might cherish? She did not yet have answers, but she was willing, in that quiet moment, to begin searching for them. And Tomas, standing nearby, looked at the horizon with similar thoughts. Perhaps, he wondered, this unexpected arrival was not a punishment at all, but the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. The story of Nayeli and Tomas had begun. It was a story of uncertainty, of adjustment, of slow understanding. It was a story of two lives colliding by fate, and the world beyond their small farm had no idea how profoundly this simple meeting would change everything. The days following Nayeli's arrival at Tomas's farm were quiet, but full of unspoken tension. Both were strangers, in a world that demanded they live under the same roof. Nayeli, proud and cautious, kept herself apart, watching Tomas as he went about his work. She noticed every detail, the way he tilled the soil, the way he carefully watered his plants, the way he mended tools with hands that were rough but skilled. To the villagers, Tomas's life might have seemed small and simple, but to Nayeli, it was full of patience and quiet strength, qualities that were often overlooked in her bustling tribe. Despite her careful observation, Nayeli did not immediately trust him. Every glance and movement seemed measured, and she could sense the uncertainty in his demeanor as well. Tomas, for his part, struggled to understand how to reach her. He had faced hardship his entire life, but no challenge had prepared him for living with a woman who carried both pride and pain in equal measure. He wanted to be kind, but he also knew that any wrong word or action could make her retreat further into herself. Their interactions were few and awkward at first. A nod, a polite smile, a quiet exchange of words. They existed in a fragile space between strangers and companions. The first meals shared under the same roof were almost ceremonial in their simplicity. Tomas prepared what little he had: corn, beans, and sometimes wild game he had hunted, and offered them to Nayeli with careful politeness. She accepted the food but said little, keeping her eyes on the ground or scanning the horizon. She had never been treated this way before. In her village, elders and men alike often judged her harshly when she stepped out of line. Here, with Tomas, there was no criticism, only a quiet presence that demanded neither obedience nor praise. It was strange, and yet, a part of her began to notice how comforting it was to be treated with such respect. Time passed, and the first small gestures of connection began to appear. Nayeli started helping Tomas in minor ways. She would carry water from the well, tend to the small vegetable patch, or repair broken tools with her nimble hands. Each act was a subtle test, a way for her to see if Tomas's kindness was genuine. Tomas, in turn, began to notice the care and skill she brought to even the smallest tasks. He was amazed at the precision of her movements, the way she seemed to understand the land and its needs almost instinctively. Slowly, a rhythm formed between them, a silent understanding that neither had expected. The villagers watched with curiosity, some even with disbelief. "She will never stay," they whispered. "He cannot handle her pride," said others. Rumors traveled like wildfire, and soon, neighbors began stopping by, either out of genuine concern or sheer curiosity. Tomas and Nayeli, however, paid little attention to the whispers. They were learning, in their quiet way, that life at the edge of the village allowed them a freedom that was often denied within its crowded streets. Here, there was no constant judgment, only work, patience, and the chance to understand one another. Nayeli's pride remained, of course. She was not easily impressed, and she refused to let herself appear weak or dependent. Yet, even as she resisted, she began to notice the qualities in Tomas that were admirable. He was not wealthy, not powerful, not influential, but he possessed a steady courage that came from surviving the hardships of life with honesty and humility. He did not boast, he did not complain, and he did not seek to control her. For the first time, Nayeli realized that strength did not always come from dominance. Sometimes, it came from resilience and quiet integrity. Tomas also grew in unexpected ways. Living with Nayeli, he learned to appreciate qualities he had never thought about before. Her independence, her skill, her ability to face life with courage and intelligence, these were lessons he absorbed quietly, day by day. He began to see that strength was not always measured by physical work alone. It could also be measured by the heart, by the willingness to face life's challenges with dignity. This realization deepened his respect for Nayeli, even as he struggled to find words to express it. Evenings were still the hardest part of the day. The silence of the farm, once comforting to Tomas, sometimes made Nayeli restless. She missed the noise of the village, the chatter of friends, the laughter of children, and the familiar sounds of community. But as she sat by the fire, watching Tomas repair tools or prepare the next day's work, she began to notice something new. Here, the world moved at a different pace. There was no rush, no judgment, no expectation to perform for others' approval. It was a world where effort and honesty mattered more than appearances or status. Slowly, she began to feel the first hints of comfort, though she did not yet call it home. Their connection grew not through grand gestures, but through small acts of care. Tomas would leave a warm meal for Nayeli when she worked late in the fields. Nayeli, in turn, would mend his clothes and organize his tools without asking for thanks. Each small act created a bond of trust, though neither spoke of it aloud. They were learning the value of presence, of shared labor, of simply being there for another person. It was a slow process, but it planted the seeds of respect and friendship that would grow into something stronger over time. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Rain poured in torrents, turning the dry earth to mud, and the wind rattled the small house. Tomas worked quickly to secure the crops and protect the animals, but Nayeli stepped forward without hesitation. She joined him in the fields, moving with skill and confidence, helping him shelter the animals and repair broken fences. For the first time, Tomas saw her not as a guest or a stranger, but as an equal partner in facing the challenges of life. Nayeli, too, felt a sense of satisfaction and pride not just in the work, but in the fact that she was contributing to something real, something that mattered. The storm passed, leaving the air fresh and the land sparkling with new life. That evening, as they sat together quietly, a small fire crackling between them, a sense of peace settled over the farm. Neither spoke much, but the comfort was mutual. For Nayeli, the day had shown that life could be faced alongside someone trustworthy, someone steady and reliable. For Tomas, it had shown that strength came not just from surviving alone, but from sharing burdens with another person. Over time, the patterns of daily life became familiar. Nayeli began to notice the rhythm of the seasons, the way Tomas prepared for planting and harvest, the way he cared for the small animals and the land itself. She started offering suggestions, sharing knowledge from her own experience, and Tomas listened. He began to implement her ideas, amazed at how practical and effective they were. Slowly, respect and admiration grew between them, forming the foundation of a bond neither had expected when the elders first sent her to his home. Neighbors and villagers began to take notice as well. The whispers that once carried doubt now shifted to curiosity, then to admiration. People saw the two of them working together, helping one another, and quietly transforming the small farm into a place of harmony and order. Nayeli and Tomas did not seek attention or praise, but it was impossible to ignore the change their partnership had brought. The woman who had been sent away as punishment was slowly becoming an integral part of the farm, and perhaps even of Tomas's life. By the end of the first month, the farm had taken on a new energy. The crops were healthier, the animals were better cared for, and the small house seemed warmer and more alive. Nayeli's laughter, rare at first, began to echo in the fields when Tomas shared stories or jokes. Tomas, too, found himself smiling more, feeling a quiet joy he had never known when living alone. It was not love yet, not in the sense of romance, but it was a deep, abiding respect and a sense of partnership. They were learning to rely on each other, not out of obligation, but out of choice, a choice that grew naturally, day by day. In the quiet moments before sleep, Nayeli would often sit by the fire, reflecting on how far she had come in just a few weeks. She had arrived full of anger, resentment, and fear. Yet now she felt something she had never expected: curiosity about the life she was building with Tomas. She wondered if the punishment the elders had imposed was truly meant to break her spirit, or if, perhaps, it was a strange blessing she had yet to recognize. Tomas, lying nearby, thought similar thoughts. He had been given a stranger to care for, and in return, he had received a companion who challenged him, inspired him, and quietly transformed his life. The second part of their story was not about grand events or dramatic changes. It was about observation, patience, and the slow building of trust. Nayeli and Tomas had not yet become family, nor had they fallen in love, but they were learning to coexist, to respect one another, and to see the value in each other's presence. The foundation of their bond was being laid, one small act at a time, and it was stronger for its subtlety. By the end of those first weeks, one truth became clear: life was unpredictable, and people could surprise one another in the most unexpected ways. Nayeli had come to the farm as a punishment, a stranger thrust into a world she had not chosen. Tomas had received her as an obligation, unsure how to respond. Yet, together, they were beginning to discover that even the harshest circumstances could give rise to understanding, cooperation, and a quiet form of happiness. And so, as the stars began to dot the night sky above the plains, the farm was quiet, but it was alive in a new way. Nayeli and Tomas sat on the porch, side by side yet silent, each reflecting on the day's work, each considering the possibilities of tomorrow. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time, both felt a sense of hope. They were no longer merely a stranger and a poor farmer. They were companions, partners in a world that had once seemed lonely and unforgiving. And in that small, simple way, the beginnings of a home were forming, even if neither of them yet fully realized it. As the seasons shifted, life on Tomas's farm settled into a quiet rhythm. The sun rose early and set late, painting the fields in brilliant shades of gold and green. Nayeli and Tomas moved through their days with a shared sense of purpose, though words were often fewer than the thoughts that passed silently between them. What had begun as tension and uncertainty was slowly transforming into mutual understanding and respect, though neither of them yet recognized the depth of their connection. Nayeli had grown more confident in her new role, though she never forgot that she had been sent to the farm as a punishment. She still felt the sting of being controlled by the elders of her tribe. Yet the injustice she had endured was slowly softened by the quiet dignity of Tomas. He did not scold her. He did not demand obedience, and he did not judge her. Instead, he treated her with patience, kindness, and consistency. Each small gesture, from sharing the water she carried from the well to offering her a warm meal, spoke of a respect that Nayeli had rarely encountered in her life. Slowly, the edges of her pride softened, replaced by a cautious willingness to engage with him and the life around her. The farm itself became a classroom, where both learned from each other. Tomas showed Nayeli the details of tending to crops in a changing climate, how to protect young plants from harsh winds, and how to care for the soil so it could provide food season after season. Nayeli, in turn, shared knowledge from her own experiences, how to identify plants that could heal minor injuries, how to track animals, and ways to make the work of the farm more efficient. Her skills were extraordinary, and Tomas could not help but admire her. With each lesson, they grew closer, not just in cooperation, but in understanding. Trust, however, was not built overnight. Nayeli sometimes resisted his suggestions, testing whether his kindness was genuine. She had grown up learning to question motives, to protect herself in a world where strength often meant survival. Tomas never reacted with anger. Instead, he listened, considered her perspective, and sometimes followed her guidance. This patience impressed Nayeli more than any words could convey. Slowly, she began to realize that his intentions were honest, that he valued her input and respected her judgment. For the first time in weeks, Nayeli felt a small sense of safety, a feeling she had not expected to find in a place she had come to despise. Evenings were often their quietest moments, yet they were also the moments when their bond deepened most. After long hours of work in the fields, they would sit together near the fire, cleaning tools, mending clothes, or simply resting. The silence was comfortable, not oppressive. Sometimes they spoke, sharing stories from their pasts, the hardships they had endured, or their dreams for the future. Tomas spoke softly of his childhood, of his parents' hard work, and the lessons he had learned from life on the plains. Nayeli spoke cautiously, revealing small fragments of her own past, her family, and the skills she had learned. Each story brought them closer, revealing the humanity they shared despite coming from very different worlds. One day, a sudden challenge tested their growing partnership. A wild animal had broken into the small pen where Tomas kept his chickens. Nayeli had been observing the surroundings and noticed signs that Tomas had missed broken branches, disturbed dirt, and tracks leading away from the pen. She acted quickly, guiding Tomas to secure the animals and repair the fencing. Tomas marveled at her skill and decisiveness. He realized that her talents were not just useful, but essential for the survival of the farm. More importantly, he recognized that her willingness to help stemmed from a growing trust in him. Nayeli was no longer just enduring her situation, she was contributing to it, shaping it, and improving it with her presence. This incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Nayeli began to see Tomas as more than a stranger or a host. She started to appreciate his intelligence, his hard work, and his steadfastness. He, in turn, began to see her as more than a guest or an obligation. She was strong, capable, and wise, with a perspective that enriched his life and his work. Mutual respect became the foundation of their connection, though neither had yet acknowledged it openly. It was a quiet understanding that grew with each shared task, each act of patience, and each small victory. The farm itself began to change. Where once it had been merely functional, it now bore the mark of two minds working together. Crops grew taller and healthier. The soil was richer, and the small house felt warmer. Neighbors began to notice the changes. Some came to offer advice, while others simply watched in quiet admiration. Rumors of their unusual partnership spread throughout the village. "She is learning to care for the farm," some whispered. "He is learning from her," others said. The village, which had once doubted their coexistence, slowly began to respect the quiet harmony that was growing at the edge of the plains. Nayeli's pride remained a constant companion. She would not let herself seem dependent or weak, and she carefully guarded her independence. Yet, as days turned into weeks, she realized that working with Tomas was not a loss of freedom, but a form of strength. She could contribute her skills, share her knowledge, and still retain her autonomy. In fact, the more she helped, the more confident she felt. Tomas never tried to control her, never forced her to conform, and this gave her a sense of empowerment she had rarely experienced. Their evenings began to carry a quiet ritual. They would sit on the porch after their work, the sky above painted with oranges, pinks, and purples as the sun set. They shared simple meals, sometimes exchanging small words of humor or observation. Occasionally, they would sit in complete silence, listening to the wind, the distant calls of animals, or the rustle of leaves. In these moments, a deeper bond formed, a connection built not on words or declarations, but on presence and shared experience. They were learning to trust each other, to rely on each other, and to find comfort in the rhythm of daily life. One afternoon, Tomas fell ill with a fever that left him weak and bedridden. Nayeli, despite her initial reluctance to engage, stepped forward to care for him. She brought him water, prepared simple meals, and tended to his needs with a quiet determination. For Tomas, this was a revelation. He realized that Nayeli's presence in his life was not merely functional. It was meaningful. She cared, not because she was obligated, but because she had chosen to care. Nayeli, too, discovered a new aspect of herself. She realized that her skills and knowledge could protect and nurture someone she had come to respect. In caring for Tomas, she found a sense of purpose and connection she had never expected. The weeks continued, and with them came a series of small victories and shared successes. Crops thrived, the animals were well tended, and the home itself grew warmer and more welcoming. Nayeli's laughter began to echo in the fields when Tomas shared stories or made light-hearted jokes. Tomas found himself smiling more often, feeling a quiet joy in her presence. The farm, once a place of survival and routine, had become a shared world of growth, understanding, and mutual respect. Even the villagers began to recognize the transformation. What had once been seen as an awkward and uncomfortable arrangement was now admired. People noticed the partnership, the respect, and the quiet harmony that characterized the farm. Nayeli, once considered stubborn and independent to a fault, was now seen as a source of knowledge and skill. Tomas, once overlooked and underestimated, was recognized for his patience, intelligence, and strength of character. Together, they had created something that transcended the expectations of the tribe, a home built on trust, respect, and shared effort. By the end of this period, Nayeli and Tomas were no longer simply coexisting. They were collaborating, supporting, and learning from each other. Their relationship, though still cautious and deliberate, had grown deeper. They had discovered that strength was not about dominance or control, but about patience, understanding, and shared experience. They had learned that respect could grow quietly, that trust could be nurtured with small acts of care, and that partnership could emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. In the quiet moments before sleep, Nayeli often reflected on the journey so far. She had arrived at the farm, filled with anger and uncertainty, expecting punishment and hardship. Instead, she had found a man who treated her with respect, a home that offered safety and comfort, and a life where her skills and intelligence were valued. Tomas, lying nearby, thought similar thoughts. He had been given a stranger, and in return, he had received a companion who challenged him, inspired him, and enriched his life in ways he could not have imagined. The third part of their story was not about dramatic changes or sudden events. It was about growth, learning, and the slow building of trust and understanding. Nayeli and Tomas were becoming partners in a life neither had chosen but were gradually learning to embrace. They were discovering the value of collaboration, the strength found in patience, and the quiet joy of shared experience. The foundation of their home was being laid, stronger and more resilient than either could have anticipated. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows across the fields, Nayeli and Tomas sat on the porch, side by side. They spoke little, yet their silence was full of meaning. They had begun to find comfort in each other's presence, to appreciate the strengths they brought to their shared life, and to recognize that even in circumstances that seemed harsh or unfair, something beautiful could grow. Their journey was far from over, but they had already taken the first steps toward a bond that would shape the rest of their lives. Life on the farm had settled into a rhythm that felt natural to both Nayeli and Tomas. Yet, it was not without its challenges. Nature was unpredictable, and the plains were unforgiving. Dry spells threatened their crops, sudden storms battered the small house, and illness sometimes struck without warning. These trials tested not only their skills and patience, but also the strength of the bond that had slowly formed between them. Yet, it was precisely through these difficulties that their connection deepened and their lives became richer. One spring morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, Tomas surveyed the fields with concern. The previous night's heavy rain had flooded part of the vegetable patch, washing away young seedlings that had taken weeks to nurture. Tomas felt the familiar weight of worry settle over his shoulders. But when he looked toward Nayeli, he saw her already at work, assessing the damage, gathering materials to repair the irrigation channels, and plotting a way to salvage what they could. Her calm and focused approach surprised him. Where he might have panicked or despaired, she acted with confidence and purpose. He realized that her presence was no longer just helpful, it was vital to the survival of the farm. Nayeli worked alongside Tomas, directing him to strengthen the fences, dig trenches to redirect the water, and replant the seeds that had been swept away. The teamwork was seamless. For the first time, Tomas felt not like a solitary farmer facing the whims of nature, but as part of a partnership capable of overcoming obstacles together. Nayeli's knowledge of the land, combined with his experience, created a synergy neither could have achieved alone. And for Nayeli, there was a sense of pride in being able to contribute meaningfully, not as a guest performing chores, but as an equal, shaping their shared life. The days that followed brought more challenges. A sudden illness swept through the small animals on the farm, and both Tomas and Nayeli worked tirelessly to nurse them back to health. Nights were long and exhausting, filled with worry and labor. Yet, even in the hardest moments, they found ways to support one another. Nayeli would whisper words of encouragement, showing Tomas how to mix herbal remedies she had learned in her village, while Tomas handled the heavy lifting and ensured that every animal had food and shelter. Their mutual respect deepened as they faced each trial together, each realizing that the other's strengths complemented their own in ways that were both practical and emotional. Life was not only about work and survival. Small victories brought moments of joy and laughter. When the crops finally began to grow strong after the flood, both Tomas and Nayeli celebrated quietly, sharing a simple meal of roasted corn and beans, smiling at their shared success. On other days, they would sit outside as the sun dipped below the horizon, talking about dreams they had once thought impossible. Nayeli shared stories of her childhood, the skills she had learned from her family, and the pride she took in her independence. Tomas spoke of his hopes for a stable, thriving farm, a home filled with care and cooperation, and a life where he could grow old, surrounded by the fruits of honest labor. Through these conversations, they began to see each other in a new light. Nayeli no longer saw Tomas merely as a kind host or a man who had been given responsibility for her care. She saw his determination, his integrity, and the quiet courage that had allowed him to survive the hardships of life on the plains. Tomas, in turn, began to see Nayeli not as a stubborn stranger sent as punishment, but as a partner whose intelligence, skill, and strength of character enriched his life and inspired him to grow. The farm, once a place of mere survival, had become a home, in the truest sense, a place where both could thrive, learn, and find comfort in each other's presence. Yet, not all challenges came from the land or the farm. The whispers of the village continued, and sometimes, strangers would pass by, questioning the arrangement. How can they work so well together? They would ask. She was meant to be punished, yet she seems happy. How does he manage her pride? These questions, though sometimes asked with curiosity, carried judgment. Nayeli and Tomas learned to ignore them, finding strength in their shared labor and mutual respect, rather than seeking approval from others. Over time, the villagers' doubts softened into admiration. People began to recognize that this unusual partnership was something special, a testament to patience, resilience, and the quiet power of cooperation. One particularly harsh summer brought an unexpected challenge that tested both their resilience and their trust in each other. A heat wave dried the land, causing the crops to wither under the relentless sun. Tomas worked tirelessly, drawing water from the well and carefully irrigating the fields, but it was not enough. Nayeli stepped in, offering techniques she had learned in her childhood for conserving water, mulching the soil, and protecting young plants from the scorching heat. Together, they devised a plan that not only saved much of the harvest but also strengthened the bond between them. Each realized that their survival depended not only on individual effort, but on their ability to trust and rely on one another. These trials were mirrored by moments of reflection and quiet revelation. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Nayeli spoke softly of her fears when she first arrived at the farm. "I thought I was being punished," she admitted. "But now I see that life can take unexpected turns. I never imagined I could find peace here." Tomas looked at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and admiration. "I was afraid I could not handle this," he confessed. "But you have taught me strength, patience, and the value of working together. I could not imagine this life without you." Their words were simple, but they carried the weight of months of struggle, cooperation, and growing understanding. Over time, their home began to flourish in ways neither could have anticipated. The farm became more productive, the animals healthier, and the house itself seemed warmer and more welcoming. Their teamwork extended beyond survival to creativity and improvement. Nayeli introduced new planting techniques, and Tomas experimented with building structures to better protect the crops. Each success, each lesson learned, reinforced their trust and respect for one another. It became clear that their partnership was not temporary or convenient. It was the foundation of a shared life, built on understanding, effort, and mutual care. Their relationship deepened in ways beyond the practical. Nayeli began to understand that her independence did not conflict with her connection to Tomas. She could be strong, skilled, and self-reliant, while also trusting him and sharing the burdens of life. Tomas, likewise, recognized that relying on another person was not a weakness, but a source of strength. Together, they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and discovered that life could be richer and more meaningful when shared. As the months passed, the farm became a symbol of their resilience and partnership. Villagers who had once doubted them now came to observe, sometimes seeking advice or guidance. Nayeli's skills and knowledge became known beyond the farm, and Tomas's quiet strength and perseverance earned him respect. Yet, despite the attention, both remained focused on the life they were building together. Their home was no longer just a place to live. It was a sanctuary where effort, respect, and care created a sense of belonging neither had expected when their journey began. By the end of this period, the transformation was clear. Nayeli, once sent away as a punishment, had become the heart of the farm. Her skills, her courage, and her wisdom shaped every aspect of life there. Tomas had grown not only as a farmer, but as a person, learning patience, collaboration, and the power of shared responsibility. Together, they had turned what had begun as hardship into a life full of purpose, stability, and quiet joy. The trials and triumphs of this part of their story showed that even the harshest circumstances could be transformed into something beautiful when met with patience, cooperation, and respect. Nayeli and Tomas had discovered that true strength was not measured by endurance alone, but by the ability to work together, to face challenges side by side, and to grow as individuals, while supporting one another. Their home was no longer merely a shelter. It was a testament to resilience, understanding, and the power of human connection. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows across the fields, Nayeli and Tomas paused to reflect on all they had achieved. They were no longer simply a woman sent as punishment and a poor farmer. They were partners, companions, and collaborators in a life neither had chosen, but had learned to cherish. The farm, once humble and unremarkable, now reflected the strength, skill, and care of two people who had learned to face life together. And so, with the stars beginning to sparkle above the plains and the cool evening air settling around them, the farm was quiet, but alive with purpose. Nayeli and Tomas, sitting side by side, shared a sense of accomplishment, trust, and connection that could not be measured by words alone. They had faced trials, celebrated small triumphs, and discovered the profound strength found in partnership. The foundation of their home and their future was now firmly in place, preparing them for the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. The seasons continued to change, bringing both challenges and rewards to the small farm on the edge of the plains. Nayeli and Tomas had grown stronger not just in skill, but in understanding, trust, and respect for one another. Their home, once a place of uncertainty and tension, had become a sanctuary, built from patience, cooperation, and quiet love. The life they were shaping together had become a reflection of their shared determination, proving that even the most unexpected circumstances could lead to something beautiful. As the years passed, the farm flourished. Crops grew in abundance, and the small herd of animals they had nurtured became healthy and strong. Nayeli and Tomas learned to anticipate the needs of the land and each other. Where once they had moved cautiously, unsure of how to communicate or cooperate, now they worked in harmony, moving with a rhythm that reflected months and years of shared labor and understanding. Each task, planting, harvesting, feeding animals, repairing fences, was no longer a burden, but a shared accomplishment. The farm itself became a living testament to their partnership, Nayeli's role had evolved beyond that of a helper or guest. She was now the heart of the home, guiding the work, teaching Tomas new techniques she had learned from her family, and finding ways to improve their life together. Her confidence had grown immensely, not just because she had proven herself capable, but because she had found someone who valued her insight and respected her choices. Tomas relied on her not out of necessity alone, but because her perspective had become essential to the success of their home and farm. In turn, Tomas had grown in ways he could never have imagined. He had learned patience, resilience, and the strength of collaboration. Where he had once been cautious and solitary, he now found joy in sharing both labor and life with another. Their evenings, once quiet and uncertain, had become a time of reflection and warmth. After long days tending the land, they would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Nayeli often shared her observations about the land, the animals, or the coming season, while Tomas spoke of his plans for improvements or shared simple stories from his past. There was laughter now, a sound that had been rare when they first met. Small jokes, shared memories, and quiet smiles had replaced the tension and awkwardness of their early days. Their connection, built over months and years, had transformed into something deeper than friendship or partnership. It was a bond rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and care. The community around them began to notice the transformation. Where once villagers had whispered about the unfairness of Nayeli's situation, they now admired the partnership that had grown between her and Tomas. People came seeking advice, guidance, and inspiration from the couple whose lives had become intertwined in such a remarkable way. Nayeli and Tomas, however, remained focused on the work at hand and on each other. They did not seek recognition or praise, yet it was impossible to ignore the admiration they had earned through diligence, skill, and the quiet strength of their relationship. Despite the admiration and success, life was not without its trials. Droughts, storms, and the occasional illness reminded them that survival required constant effort. Yet, each challenge was faced together, and each small victory reinforced their bond. When crops survived a particularly dry summer, they celebrated quietly, sharing simple meals and acknowledging the hard work that had brought them success. When a storm threatened to destroy the fences and animal shelters, they labored side by side through the night, relying on each other's strengths to protect what they had built. It was through these shared experiences that their partnership matured, becoming resilient and enduring. Nayeli had also begun to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered her arrival, sent away by her tribe as a punishment. At first, she had resisted, felt anger, and struggled with uncertainty. She had doubted Tomas, doubted the life she had been forced into, and doubted herself. Yet, over time, she realized that the punishment she had feared was, in fact, a turning point that allowed her to discover a new kind of freedom, a life where her skills, intelligence, and strength were valued, and where she could choose to build something meaningful. She understood now that her independence did not conflict with companionship. It enhanced it. In this shared life, she had found not limitation, but possibility. Tomas, too, reflected on the man he had become. He remembered the early days, when he had been uncertain and cautious, unsure of how to relate to Nayeli or manage the sudden responsibility thrust upon him. He had feared her pride, her skill, and the unknown that she represented. Yet, through patience, respect, and openness, he had learned to see her not as a challenge to overcome, but as a partner to grow with. He had discovered the strength of collaboration, the rewards of trust, and the quiet joy of companionship. The farm and the life they had built together had transformed him, just as it had transformed Nayeli. One autumn day, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, they sat together on the porch, overlooking the thriving farm. The animals moved contentedly across the land, The crops swayed gently in the breeze, and the small house stood as a testament to their years of labor, patience, and care. Nayeli reached for Tomas's hand, and he held it without hesitation. They shared a quiet understanding that went beyond words, a recognition that their lives were intertwined, that their hardships had forged a bond stronger than either had expected. It was in these quiet moments that the true depth of their relationship became clear. Nayeli and Tomas were no longer defined by the circumstances that had brought them together. Nayeli was no longer a woman sent as punishment. She was the heart of a home, a source of knowledge, guidance, and strength. Tomas was no longer a poor farmer struggling to survive. He was a partner, a friend, and a companion who had learned the value of trust, patience, and collaboration. Together, they had turned hardship into opportunity, punishment into purpose, and uncertainty into a life filled with meaning. Their home became a place of warmth, learning, and growth. Nayeli taught Tomas new skills, shared her knowledge of plants and animals, and helped him improve his farming techniques. Tomas, in turn, shared his practical wisdom, built structures to protect their home, and offered steady support through every challenge. The farm thrived not only because of their hard work, but because of the harmony and cooperation that defined every task. Each day brought a new lesson, a new opportunity to grow closer, and a renewed sense of purpose. Over time, the story of their partnership became known beyond the farm. The village that had once doubted them now looked upon Nayeli and Tomas with admiration and respect. They had not only survived the hardships of life on the plains, but had flourished, building a home, a farm, and a life together. The lesson was clear. Even in the most unexpected circumstances, human connection, patience, and cooperation could transform hardship into opportunity and struggle into achievement. Nayeli and Tomas had also learned the subtle power of shared silence. Words were not always necessary. A glance, a gesture, or a quiet act of care was enough to communicate understanding, trust, and respect. They had discovered that the strongest bonds are often formed in the spaces between words, in the shared labor, the mutual support, and the quiet moments that pass unnoticed by the world but are deeply meaningful to those who live them. As winter approached, bringing frost and shorter days, they worked together to prepare the farm for the cold months ahead. They stored food, reinforced shelters, and tended carefully to their animals. The work was hard, yet it was infused with a sense of accomplishment and purpose that came from knowing they faced every challenge together. Their home, once humble and uncertain, had become a sanctuary, a place of warmth, safety, and connection. Looking back over the years, Nayeli realized that the life she had been given as punishment had become a life she cherished. Tomas, too, understood that the stranger who had arrived on his doorstep was now the most important person in his world. Their journey had been long, filled with obstacles, learning, and growth. Yet, through patience, trust, and cooperation, they had created something extraordinary: a home, a partnership, and a life defined by mutual respect and shared purpose. And so, the story came full circle. Nayeli and Tomas, brought together by circumstance and chance, had transformed their lives and their home. What had begun as punishment had become blessing, uncertainty had become security, and hardship had become triumph. They had discovered that true strength lies not in isolation, but in connection, that love and respect can grow quietly, patiently, and steadily, and that even the most unexpected journeys can lead to the most profound fulfillment. As they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains and feeling the cool winter breeze, they knew that their story was more than a tale of survival. It was a story of resilience, partnership, and the extraordinary power of human connection. They had built a life not defined by the hardships that had brought them together, but by the care, respect, and love that had grown from them. In each other, they had found home. And in that quiet, enduring truth, Nayeli and Tomas understood that the life they had built together was the greatest gift either could have imagined. It was not given by the tribe, nor by circumstance. It was built by their own hands, their hearts, and their shared journey. A life of hardship had transformed into a life of joy. A stranger had become family. A punishment had become home.